Good morning, everyone. So I'll be talking to you today about exposing and opposing slavery today. Or, other words, we are also talking about human trafficking, or another way of calling it is modern day slavery. So just something quick about myself. I am Tertia de Klerk, and I'm one of the founders of the organization by the name of the Joseph Movement. And it's not Joseph and Mary, it's Joseph with the coat of many colors. And the reason why we decided on calling the organization the Joseph Movement is because Joseph is one of the first recorded people in history to ever be sold into slavery. So that's where the Joseph Movement's name comes from. I'm also the managing director of the organization, and I grew very passionate about human trafficking after a very tragic death of a loved one. And you can see my testimony on our website, josephmovement.org.za. I also studied psychology, and I'm currently trying to finish my criminology studies. So what is human trafficking? According to South Africa's legislation, it becomes quite complicated, but just to simplify it for today, it's simply something that takes place when a person is either tricked, coerced, or manipulated for the use of their body or for their labor. So that's a very easy way of remembering what human trafficking is, and we'll go into more detail a bit later. So why should we talk about human trafficking? Why should we be aware of human trafficking? Well, some of the most serious facts about human trafficking is that it's the fastest growing organized crime in the world, and it's also the second largest organized crime in the world. It is also a hidden crime, and I'll go into detail more about why that is. What is very important, especially based on the South African legislation, is that when it comes to human trafficking, transportation is not a prerequisite. A lot of people don't know this, and I will also touch on that a bit later. We all come across a human trafficked victim multiple times throughout our lifetimes. And then also perpetrators are often family members or friends of family. So some interesting statistics. Currently, we are looking at 50 million people globally that are trapped in slavery, and there is a possibility that that statistic has increased. 7 million people in slavery, modern day slavery, human trafficking, or in a more legal term, it's called trafficking in persons, or TIP for short. So 7 million in Africa. And then we are looking at approximately 160,000 people that are trapped in human trafficking at any given time in South Africa. Another shocking statistic is that we see that only up to 2% of victims ever manage to escape. And also 62% of perpetrators are males, and then you'll see 38 are females. So we need to be very aware of the fact that it's not only males that are involved in traffic syndicates, or there are also individuals that take opportunities, and they are definitely female as well. Always something that's very important to remember. We tend to always point fingers at the men. And then when it comes to South Africa is a source, a transit, and a destination zone or country for human trafficking. It is a major problem in South Africa. It is also one of the most common destinations that traffickers use for their operations. And then the contributing factors specifically in South Africa is high unemployment. There's also our weak and our corrupt borders. There's muti and cultural practices such as a kutwala, which is some beautiful practice of the Xhosa culture, which has been completely distorted throughout the years. And then we've got absent parents, which we see a lot in the informal settlements or child-run households, and then prostitution, and of course technology, and referring mostly to pornography. Okay, so what exactly does human trafficking look like? Many of us mostly see on mainstream media people that go missing, or we hear about containers that are shipped across borders. Although those are true, they actually make out the minimum percentage of trafficking cases that take place. So one of the most common and biggest forms of human trafficking is sex trafficking. Most successful sex trafficking rings are run by, you can take a wild guess, is it male or female? Female. The most successful trafficking rings are run by females. And where there's a demand, there always needs to be a supply. And there's a great demand for sex, for pornography, for prostitution, etc. Pornography specifically, when you look at the topic of pornography, we often remind those who say to us, but it's my choice, it's something that I do in private, but we always try to remind those who are pro-pornography that you do not know under which circumstances those people are acting. And then also good to remember that any person who is under 18 that is involved in any form of sex is legally considered child abuse, even if it is with consent. Labor trafficking is also a very big form of human trafficking. We see specifically in South Africa that the fishing industry is a big problem, agriculture is a big problem, we also have domestic servitude, that's a big problem. So sex trafficking and labor trafficking are the two major forms and faces of human trafficking. However, there are other forms of human trafficking. And just for interesting sake, is there anyone who can guess what other forms or faces of human trafficking there are? You can take a wild guess, doesn't matter. So we've covered sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and there are quite a few more.
Organ harvesting?
Organ harvesting is one, yes, correct.
Multi-murder, multi-murder.
Okay, so that will fall under organ trafficking.
And drug trafficking?
No, drug trafficking, remember, would not be human trafficking. However, I will touch on drug trafficking later, which is an interesting fact. Anyone else want to try?
What about begging?
Yeah, exactly. Begging. So we have forced begging. Anyone else want to try? One last try.
Labor?
Yeah, we've done labor now. Okay, so we have forced marriage, as I mentioned earlier. Forced marriage is a very big problem, especially if we look at North Africa. And then, unfortunately, in South Africa, it's become a major problem where ukutwala, which I mentioned, is a beautiful Xhosa practice, at least it used to be. But now what happens is that young girls are being abducted from their homes against their will, and they are handed over to older men for marriage. Then we have zama zamas, which I'm sure most of us know are illegal minors. Many of them do go into it willingly. However, there is a major problem with especially not just vulnerable adults, but children that are being used to go into these illegal mines or old closed off mines. And one of the most obvious reasons is because the kids are small and they can fit into cracks and so forth, small passages and so on. And these are unstable mines, and it is exceptionally dangerous, not only life-threatening, but also very bad for their health. Then we've got snuff movies. Does anyone here know what a snuff movie is? Goodness, you guys are far too innocent. Yes.
That's filming people getting tortured and abused and all that.
That's correct. So a snuff movie is when people are being tortured and murdered on camera, and it is uploaded onto the dark web. That is a form of trafficking, human trafficking. And then forced begging, as Justin mentioned, another form of trafficking that is a big problem in South Africa. And I think many of us are guilty of it, including myself. It's very difficult when you have a beggar standing at your window of your vehicle. However, because of the work I've been doing, I've been very aware of the problem. Traffickers would force the vulnerable, the homeless, etc., to beg, and they have a quota for the day that they need to reach. And if they don't, there would be some form of serious consequence. And then child soldiers is a very big problem, especially up Africa, and children disappear and then they are used, especially in war-torn countries. Organ and baby harvesting, and this is for various reasons. As Lebo mentioned, that's where the muti comes in. Aborted babies are often also used for muti and so forth.
Is that like sacrifices?
Yes, there are various practices, so cultural practices, religious practices, so it would include sacrifices when it comes to the babies, sexual abuse, and a lot of other vulgar practices. Then there's bachabazi. Bachabazi is boy play. That is a practice that comes from the north. This is when young adolescent boys are groomed and they are forced to serve older men, dance at their parties, and then used for their sexual pleasure as well. Forced illegal activity, and this is where the drug trafficking also comes from. So there are many cases where people are forced to do illegal activities such as drug trafficking. We have in the past few months realized that there's a very big problem with online scamming when it comes to human trafficking. A lot of the scamming, especially happening in Asia, are people who are actually being forced to do the online scamming. And then there are also other forms of trafficking, such as domestic servitude. So we see that a lot in farm areas, or we see it in B&Bs, and that is a major problem that we've also picked up, especially in South Africa as well. Okay, so what makes human trafficking a hidden crime? Prostitution, the drug trade, theft, all of these that I've just mentioned are obviously illegal activities, but many people are trafficked into those. And then, which I call the modern day slavery, or the modern day shackles rather, is fear and threats. So a lot of people are very fearful, obviously, because their lives are being threatened, the lives of their loved ones, and then foreigners that are lured into our country with, for instance, for fake job offers, their identification documents are taken from them. So they are threatened by the traffickers that they would be handed over to the authorities. Some of these foreigners also cannot find help because they're in a country where they're not eloquent enough with regards to the language. And some also are so traumatized, especially within the sex trafficking sphere, that they don't realize that they are actually a victim. And another factor that makes human trafficking a hidden crime is that some accept perks. And that we see mostly in the sex trafficking industry, in prostitution. What happens is some of them accept perks and they become traffickers themselves. And the reason why they accept that is because their abuse are then lessened. So there are 5 major ways in which traffickers lure their victims or find their victims. And this is specific to South Africa. Number 1 is false job advertisements. And that is a major problem. There is a tool that we can use to help prevent this, which I'll share with you a bit later. Then number 2 is sold by family members or a family friend. Number 3 is the lover boy method, and that obviously links in with online grooming and so forth. And then trafficked by a friend, that would also include grooming by a friend. And then only 5th on the list is abduction. We mostly hear about abduction situations on mainstream media, but the other factors often are not mentioned in mainstream media as often. So only 2%, up to 2% ever manage to escape or get rescued. And what does that say to us? It says to us prevention is the answer. Prevention is cure. And that is one of the reasons why we at the Joseph Movement focus or aim most of our energy on preventative awareness and education. So some of the ways that we do this is we do this through interviews and talks on mainstream media. We do it through social media awareness, talks at various events, and then street outreaches at night, awareness campaigns in informal settlements. That's one of my most favorite, is to go into the settlements and build relationships. And then support and awareness work with ECDs, which is Early Childhood Development Centres. Talks at schools, so we talk to pupils of various ages. We have different age-appropriate programs, and then collaborating with like-minded professionals and NGOs. So that's what we do. So what can you do? We have in South Africa what we call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And just for interesting sake, does anyone know that we do have a hotline with regards to human trafficking reporting? Okay. This number is most probably the most important number or emergency or reporting number that you can have on your phone, and that people can actually teach their children. I often joke, but it is the truth, that I phone 10111 at least once a month, and I haven't once had anyone answer. So with the human trafficking hotline, you can memorize and put this in your phone, and the hotline is an anonymous, you can do anonymous reporting. You don't have to give your name. You just give them any information that you may have. And that is if you're suspicious of any possible human trafficking practices, anything that I've shown you today, the different faces that I've shown you, if you're suspicious of something in your community or down the road, or even if you see a group of children in an area quite frequently begging, you can report it to the human trafficking hotline. And they have trained people who will ask you the right questions, and they will take it further. And then also you can and should memorize Missing Children South Africa. They don't only work with trying to find missing children, but also missing adults. So it's also a nice, easy number to remember. If you struggle to remember the actual number, you can just remember 072 missing. And then you can volunteer and you can support NGOs such as ourselves. There's also amazing organizations such as A21. They are one of the front runners globally in combating human trafficking. So you can follow any NGO on social media and share the information that they share to help create awareness. And it would be very kind if you follow the Joseph movements. So we are on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and also YouTube. And we also have a WhatsApp line, which I will share with you soon. And encourage loved one, people you know, to contact the Joseph movement and invite us to do talks and so forth. That's something else you can also do to create awareness. So, what is South Africa's national human trafficking hotline number? Can anyone remember? Oh! Woohoo! Well done. Very easy number, actually, if you think of it. 0800 222 777. Thank you. All right, so possible signs of trafficking. There's a strong sense of distrust, and often the person does not speak the language of the country. There's evidence of possible Stockholm syndrome. Who knows what Stockholm syndrome is?
Isn't that when you start to support and like your captors?
Right, yes. That's correct. You show sympathy towards your captor or perpetrator, and some even fall in love with them. And that is a form of trauma. Children specifically are afraid of being reported by authorities, obviously adults as well. And then often some children that are sex trafficking victims act inappropriately towards males. The child or the adult has a cell phone but lacks other basic belongings. That can be another possible red flag. The child travels alone or with a group of other children and are accompanied only by one adult who seems to be guarding and controlling them. There's also fear and depression, overly submissive behavior as well. Often also malnutrition or bad health or serious dental problems can also be a sign. And then obviously bruises or scars of any physical abuse or torture. When it comes to sex trafficking, we see that most of that is normally on the body and hidden, it's not on the face. And we also see that some traffickers mark their victims with specific tattoos. Okay, that is our WhatsApp number. So if you would like to be part of our WhatsApp group, you are welcome to just WhatsApp your name to that number and we can add you onto our WhatsApp group. It's not a very busy group. It's an educational group and we use it to educate people. So we send information and designs that you can very easily forward on to loved ones and so forth. And we also try and keep people up to date with regards to some information that's going around in mainstream media. So I am part of the National Freedom Network, which is a network of professionals and NGOs that work together, over 200 of us in South Africa that either work directly with trafficking awareness or in rescue or with sexual abuse. There are social workers, lawyers, and so forth, also part of our group. So we all work together to keep each other up to date and informed, especially when it comes to what is happening on the ground, what is going around on social media. Is it fake news? Is it old news? And then we try and just keep people up to date on this WhatsApp group. We often see that on social media, there are stories that just makes its rounds again. And then it's a story that is old news, something that took place a year ago. We also see stories that make its rounds again, but some of the facts have been changed. So I just want to encourage everyone, be careful when you see news or articles on social media to just forward and share it with your friends. If you really feel strong and moved by sharing it, then rather you can send a direct message to that number and just ask whether this is legit or not. So that's very important. There are people out there that try and create fear amongst communities by sending out fake news. So it's really useful to belong to a WhatsApp group like that, or to have someone that you can contact to ask. Okay, other talks that we do. So I've just briefly touched on some aspects. Is we do victim identification workshops, which are very interesting. We've worked with people who actually go into communities such as the SPCA, and we've trained some of their people as to how they can identify possible victims and then what they can do to report it. So I did mention that you can report to the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. So remember, if you're scared or you may be afraid that you might be wrong, it doesn't matter. They know what to ask you. You can report anonymously and then leave it in their hands. And I believe that it's better to report it and be wrong than not to report it and be right. So that's very important. Another talks that we do is child safety. We have an amazing program called Be Smart, which we've been given the rights to use by another NGO called Small Voice. And The Joseph Movement also translated Be Smart into an Afrikaans program, and it's so far the only Afrikaans counter-trafficking children program in South Africa called Wakker. So we do those programs in schools, and then we've got a sexual exploitation and online safety talk, pornography, the reality of both victims, and then we have a talk on prostitution, is it ever a choice? And of course, I have my testimony that I give on occasion. And that is it from me. So please do search the Joseph Movement, and you'll find us, you'll find our websites and our social media platforms. And please follow us and share our posts. I'll really appreciate that. And I would really love to see all of you on our WhatsApp group, please. So as I say, it's not a busy group. Only the administrators can post on it. So you can react at least on it, but there's no chatter or anything like that on the group.